The calendar on your wall says 2025, but scientists insist the Earth has existed for 5 billion years. So where did all that time go, and why does human history feel like it just started yesterday? Edgar Cayce's trance readings shatter our simplistic understanding of time, revealing that what we call history is merely the latest chapter in a story of souls that spans millions of years, multiple destroyed civilizations, and repeated cycles of human evolution that make our current era look like spiritual kindergarten. Most people assume civilization began a few thousand years ago with ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. But Cayce's readings describe technologically advanced societies, including Atlantis, that rose and fell hundreds of thousands of years before the pyramids, their knowledge lost in cataclysms that reset humanity again and again. The 2025 on your calendar doesn't measure Earth's age. It measures something far more significant: the years since a specific soul incarnated to shift humanity's entire spiritual trajectory, creating a new counting system not for the planet, but for awakened consciousness. What does it mean that we're living in year 2025 of the age of Christ consciousness, while walking on a planet billions of years old? And what does that reveal about your soul's own ancient journey? Share your perspective. Does learning that human souls have been incarnating on Earth for millions of years change how you view your current lifetime? The question seems simple on the surface, almost childlike in its innocence, but it reveals one of the most profound misunderstandings about reality that keeps most people trapped in a limited view of existence. If the Earth is millions or even billions of years old, why are we only counting up to 2025? The answer Edgar Cayce provided in his readings doesn't just resolve the apparent paradox, it completely transforms how we understand time, human history, consciousness evolution, and why you're alive right now in this particular moment of Earth's incomprehensibly long story. Let's start with the obvious. The number 2025 on our calendars has absolutely nothing to do with how old the Earth is. Scientists have determined through multiple dating methods that our planet formed approximately 4.5 billion years ago, and the first life emerged around 3.8 billion years ago. These are geological time measurements. They track the physical formation and evolution of rock, atmosphere, oceans, and biological organisms. But the calendar year 2025 tracks something entirely different. It counts forward from a specific spiritual event that fundamentally altered humanity's relationship with the divine. In his readings, Cayce explained that our current calendar system, what we call Anno Domini or the Common Era, begins with the incarnation of the Christ soul in Jesus of Nazareth. This wasn't chosen arbitrarily by religious authorities wanting to honor their founder. According to Cayce, this incarnation represented a cosmic turning point, a moment when a perfected soul entered physical form to demonstrate the pathway back to full unity with God. The calendar doesn't measure Earth's age, it measures the years since that consciousness breakthrough became available to all humanity. But here's where Cayce's readings become truly fascinating and address the heart of your question. Human souls have been incarnating on this ancient Earth for far, far longer than 2025 years. In fact, Cayce's readings describe human consciousness entering earthly experience millions of years ago, long before recorded history, long before the civilizations we learn about in school, long before anything we would recognize as modern humanity. Cayce spoke of souls beginning their earthly experiences in what he called the first root race, which occurred in prehistoric times when the Earth looked completely different than it does now. These weren't the humans we would recognize today. Consciousness was experimenting with physical form, learning to navigate material reality, making choices that would create karma requiring millions of years and thousands of lifetimes to resolve. The souls incarnating then are the same souls incarnating now. We've been on this journey for an almost incomprehensible length of time. According to Cayce's readings, there were multiple great civilizations that rose and fell across these millions of years, societies that achieved remarkable technological and spiritual advancement, then destroyed themselves through misuse of power and violation of spiritual law. The most famous of these in Cayce's readings is Atlantis, which he described as existing for over 200,000 years before its final destruction around 10,000 BCE. This means that while our calendar says 2025, there were advanced human civilizations building cities, developing technology, and grappling with spiritual choices more than 200,000 years ago. Think about what this means. The Egyptian pyramids, which seem impossibly ancient to us, were built only about 4,500 years ago. But Cayce's readings indicate that Atlantis had already experienced multiple rises and falls by the time Egypt was establishing its first dynasty. The ancient civilizations we study in history class, Sumer, Babylon, early China, are actually incredibly recent in the true timeline of human consciousness on Earth. They're the latest chapter, not the beginning of the book. So why don't we count from those earlier civilizations? Why does our calendar begin with Christ rather than, say, the founding of Atlantis or the first human settlement? Cayce's readings provide a spiritually sophisticated answer. Those earlier civilizations, despite their technological achievements, ultimately failed in their spiritual mission. They became lost in materialism, misused power, violated free will, and created such karmic consequences that they had to be destroyed to allow souls another chance to learn the lessons they'd missed. Atlantis, in Cayce's readings, developed crystal technology that could harness enormous energy, had flying vehicles, practiced genetic engineering, and achieved feats we might consider science fiction today. But they used these abilities selfishly, creating a slave class of beings with reduced consciousness, waging wars with devastating weapons, and ultimately destroying their entire civilization through misuse of the same technologies that had made them great. The Earth itself had to cleanse and reset, and humanity had to start over at a more primitive level to relearn fundamental spiritual principles they'd violated. This pattern of rise and fall happened multiple times over hundreds of thousands of years. Each time, souls would incarnate, build civilizations, reach heights of achievement, become spiritually lost in their own power, and face consequences that reset the experiment. The memories of these advanced ancient civilizations became myths and legends, stories of gods, golden ages, and lost paradises that we now dismiss as fantasy, but which, according to Cayce, are distorted racial memories of actual historical periods. The Christ incarnation, however, represented something fundamentally different than these earlier cycles. In his readings, Cayce explained that Jesus was a soul who had achieved perfect attunement with God through multiple incarnations, including as Adam, Enoch, Melchizedek, and others, progressively purifying and perfecting until that soul could maintain full God consciousness while in physical form. When that perfected soul incarnated as Jesus, he demonstrated what Cayce called the pattern, a human being living in complete harmony with divine will, showing that material existence and spiritual perfection aren't incompatible. This is why our calendar begins with Christ. It marks not just another religious teacher or prophet, but the moment when a soul showed humanity the actual achievable pathway out of the cycle of incarnation and karma that had trapped us for millions of years. Before Christ, according to Cayce, souls were learning through trial and error, making the same mistakes repeatedly across multiple civilizations and countless lifetimes. After Christ, there was a living example of the destination, a map showing how to return to full unity with God while still in physical form. The calendar year 2025, then, doesn't mean the Earth is only 2025 years old. It means we're 2025 years into the age of Christ consciousness, the period when the pattern for spiritual perfection has been clearly demonstrated and made available to every soul willing to follow it. It's measuring something spiritual and evolutionary, not something geological. But let's go deeper into what Cayce revealed about the timeline of human souls on Earth, because understanding this transforms how you see your own life. In his readings, Cayce indicated that souls began incarnating on Earth during what geologists call the Paleocene or Eocene epochs, roughly 50 to 60 million years ago. These early incarnations were experimental. Souls were learning to navigate physical matter, and the forms they took were not the human bodies we know today. Over millions of years, as souls incarnated again and again, consciousness gradually shaped matter into increasingly sophisticated forms. This wasn't Darwinian evolution alone. Cayce's readings suggest that consciousness itself was directing evolutionary development, with souls influencing the very bodies they were inhabiting to better serve as vehicles for spiritual expression. The human form we know today is the result of millions of years of souls learning to create a physical vehicle capable of expressing divine consciousness. By the time we reach what Cayce called the second and third root races, civilizations existing hundreds of thousands of years ago, humans had developed forms very similar to what we have now, and had created societies with language, culture, technology, and spiritual practices. But these societies left little or no archaeological evidence because they were destroyed so completely. Some were lost to the cataclysms that destroyed Atlantis, massive earthquakes and floods that Cayce dated to approximately 50,000 BCE, 28,000 BCE, and finally 10,000 BCE. Others were deliberately dismantled or abandoned as souls recognized they'd gone down destructive paths. The biblical flood narrative, according to Cayce, is a racial memory of the final destruction of Atlantis around 10,000 BCE, when the last remaining portion of that continent sank beneath the Atlantic Ocean. This wasn't just a local flood, but a worldwide cataclysm that raised ocean levels, destroyed coastal civilizations, and forced the survivors to start over. The ancient civilizations that arose afterward, Egypt, Sumer, the Indus Valley, were actually founded by refugees and descendants of the destroyed Atlantean civilization, carrying fragmented memories of the advanced knowledge their ancestors had possessed. This is why we find mysterious megalithic structures around the world that seem too sophisticated for the primitive peoples who supposedly built them. According to Cayce's readings, they weren't primitive at all. They were the inheritors of Atlantean knowledge, trying to preserve and rebuild what had been lost. The Great Pyramid, which Cayce said was built around 10,500 BCE, was constructed by Atlantean survivors as both a repository of knowledge and a spiritual initiation chamber, designed to survive the cataclysms and preserve wisdom for future generations. So when we look at a calendar saying 2025, we're seeing the end point of an incomprehensibly long journey. Millions of years of souls incarnating, learning, building civilizations, failing spiritually, facing consequences, and trying again. Hundreds of thousands of years of technological advancement and spiritual regression, of great achievements and greater failures. Thousands of years of struggling to remember what was lost and rebuild from ruins. And then, 25 years ago, a perfected soul incarnated to say, here's the way forward. Here's how to stop the cycle. Here's the pattern you've been trying to discover for millions of years. The calendar beginning with Christ isn't about dismissing or ignoring those millions of years of human experience. It's about recognizing that everything before was preparation, necessary learning, essential mistakes, karmic lessons that had to be worked through, leading to the moment when the full truth could be revealed. We count from Christ because that's when the solution to the problem we'd been struggling with for eons finally became clear. But here's the most important question Cayce's readings force us to confront. If human souls have been incarnating for millions of years, and you're here now, in year 2025 of the age of Christ consciousness, what does that mean about you? You're not a new soul randomly appearing in modern times. According to Cayce, you're an ancient being who has lived hundreds, perhaps thousands of previous lifetimes across multiple civilizations and historical periods. You may have walked the streets of Atlantis before its destruction. You may have incarnated in ancient Egypt, working in the temples or laboring on the pyramids. You may have lived in Persia, Rome, medieval Europe, colonial America, a vast chain of experiences spanning the ages, each life adding lessons, creating karma, moving you toward or away from spiritual truth. Every relationship in your current life, every challenge you face, every inexplicable talent or irrational fear may be the result of choices and experiences from those millions of years of previous incarnations. And you chose to be here now, in 2025, at this specific point in humanity's journey. Not accidentally, not randomly. According to Cayce's readings, souls choose their incarnations based on the lessons they need to learn and the karma they need to resolve. You're alive right now because this is exactly where your soul needs to be for its development, in this era, with these challenges, learning these specific lessons. The fact that it's 2025 rather than some other year is spiritually significant for your journey. You're incarnating in the age of Christ consciousness, which means you have access to the full pattern of spiritual perfection, something souls in previous ages didn't have. You can study the life and teachings of Jesus, not as distant historical information, but as a living blueprint showing exactly how to align your will with divine will. Every soul incarnating now has this advantage, this clarity, this demonstrated pathway that souls in earlier civilizations lacked. But Cayce's readings also make clear that having the pattern doesn't automatically mean following it. You still have free will. You can ignore the spiritual truths available to you, just as the Atlanteans ignored them. You can pursue material success and personal power while neglecting your soul's real mission, just as countless souls have done throughout those millions of years of human history. The opportunity is here. The question is whether you'll recognize and act on it. Think about the weight of those millions of years. All that time, all those civilizations, all those incarnations, all leading to this moment where you're reading these words and considering these questions. Doesn't that make your current choices seem more significant? If your soul has been working toward spiritual perfection for millions of years across thousands of lifetimes, then what you do today, the consciousness you develop, the love you express, the selfishness you overcome, isn't trivial. It's the continuation of an ancient journey. The calendar says 2025, but your soul's story is millions of years old. The calendar counts forward from Christ, but your journey started long before that pivotal incarnation. You're an ancient spiritual being having another human experience. And this particular experience right now, in this year, in this body, facing these specific circumstances, is precisely what your soul needs for its continued evolution. So when someone asks why we're only in 2025, if the Earth is millions of years old, the real answer is this. We're not only in 2025, we're in year 2025 of a new era of consciousness, but we're in year millions of an eternal soul journey. We count from Christ, because that's when the pattern became clear, but the journey started long before any calendar began counting. If you're feeling a deep resonance with these ideas, if something in you recognizes that you're more than this single lifetime, that's not imagination. According to Cayce, that's soul memory awakening. That's your ancient self remembering fragments of the long journey that brought you to this moment. That's the truth of your eternal nature, breaking through the illusion that you're just a temporary physical being who happens to exist in 2025. If this content is expanding your understanding of time, consciousness, and your own eternal journey, consider liking this video and subscribing to this channel. We explore Edgar Cayce's most profound teachings about reincarnation, soul evolution, and the spiritual purpose behind your current incarnation. Your engagement helps these ancient truths reach other souls who are ready to remember who they really are. Now consider what this understanding means for how you live today. If you've been incarnating for millions of years, and this lifetime is just one chapter in an eternal story, then the petty concerns that dominate most people's lives, status, possessions, others' opinions, temporary pleasures, become absurd distractions from your real purpose. You didn't struggle for millions of years through countless lifetimes to spend this incarnation obsessed with social media likes, or designer labels, or winning arguments about politics. Your soul has unfinished business. According to Cayce's readings, you came back into physical form because there are lessons you haven't yet mastered, karmic debts you need to resolve, spiritual abilities you need to develop, and service you need to offer. The specific circumstances of your life, your family, your location, your challenges, your opportunities, aren't random. They're precisely designed to give you the experiences your soul needs for its continued evolution. So the question becomes, are you treating this incarnation with the seriousness it deserves, given the millions of years of preparation that brought you here? Are you pursuing your soul's actual mission, or are you distracted by the same material illusions that destroyed previous civilizations? Are you using the clarity provided by Christ consciousness to finally break free from patterns you've been repeating for thousands of years, or are you creating new karma that will require even more future lifetimes to resolve? Cayce's readings were adamant that knowledge brings responsibility. Once you understand that you're an eternal soul with millions of years of history, you can't pretend that your daily choices don't matter. Every thought, every word, every action either moves you closer to spiritual perfection or creates obstacles you'll need to overcome in future incarnations. There are no insignificant moments, no throwaway days, no actions without spiritual consequences. The calendar may say 2025, but from your soul's perspective, this is the culmination of eons of struggle, learning, and evolution. This incarnation is your opportunity to apply everything you've learned across all those previous lives. This is your chance to finally master the lessons you've been working on for millennia. This is the lifetime where you can choose to align fully with Christ consciousness and complete the journey that began millions of years ago, when your soul first entered earthly experience. Consider the souls who incarnated before Christ demonstrated the pattern. They had to figure out the path through trial and error, making mistakes, facing consequences, slowly learning over countless lifetimes what leads to spiritual growth and what leads to spiritual regression. You don't have that excuse. The pattern has been shown. The way forward is clear. Jesus lived it and taught it. The question is whether you'll follow it. Share your thoughts in the comments. Knowing that you've been incarnating for millions of years, working towards spiritual perfection across hundreds of previous lifetimes, does that change how you view the choices you're making today? Are you living in alignment with your soul's eternal mission, or are you distracted by temporary material concerns? The community we're building here is made up of souls who are ready to remember their true nature and purpose. Your perspective and experience add to this collective awakening. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old. Human souls have been incarnating here for millions of years. Multiple civilizations have risen and fallen. Yet we count from Christ, because 25 years ago, everything changed. A perfected soul showed the pathway home. The age of stumbling in spiritual darkness ended, and the age of conscious return to divine unity began. You're here now reading this because your soul is ready for this understanding. After millions of years of preparation, you're in a lifetime where you have access to the full truth about your eternal nature and spiritual purpose. What you do with this knowledge, whether you ignore it or act on it, will determine not just this lifetime's trajectory, but potentially the course of your next several incarnations. The calendar says 2025. Your soul knows it's been much, much longer than that. The question is, will you live the rest of this incarnation as if you understand the weight and opportunity of this moment in your eternal journey? Will you finally break the patterns that have kept you cycling through physical existence for eons? Will you embrace the Christ pattern that makes liberation possible? Those millions of years led to this moment, this lifetime, this choice. Don't waste it pursuing illusions that souls have been chasing and losing for hundreds of thousands of years. Your ancient self knows better. Your soul remembers what truly matters. The only question is whether your conscious mind will finally listen and align your current life with the wisdom you've gained across millions of years of experience. The earth may be ancient, but your soul is even older. The calendar may say 2025, but your journey spans the ages. The real question isn't why we're only in 2025 if the earth is millions of years old. It's what you're going to do with this incarnation, knowing that it's the latest chapter in a story that has been unfolding since long before any calendar started counting. The moment Jesus Christ entered this physical world, something cataclysmic happened in dimensions you cannot see. A cosmic shift so profound that Edgar Cayce described it as the universe literally reorganizing itself around a single birth. What occurred in the spirit realm that night wasn't just angels singing to shepherds. It was the complete restructuring of how souls could return to God, a dimensional gateway that had been closed since humanity's fall, suddenly bursting open with blinding light. Cayce's readings reveal that every soul in every plane of existence felt this moment. The dead, the living, entities trapped between worlds, even those in what he called the borderland, all simultaneously experienced what he described as the Christ force entering materiality. This wasn't religious poetry. According to Cayce, this was the mechanical unlocking of spiritual laws that had kept humanity imprisoned in cycles of karma and separation from the divine. The implications for your own soul's journey are staggering. Because what happened cosmically that night determines whether your consciousness can ascend or remains earthbound after death. What do you think happened to the spirit world the moment Christ was born? Share your perspective in the comments. This conversation matters more than you might realize. Edgar Cayce spent decades in trance states, accessing what he called the Akashic records, the cosmic library of every soul's journey, every dimensional plane, every spiritual law governing existence. When asked about the birth of Christ, Cayce didn't offer sweet nativity stories. He revealed something that shook the foundations of how we understand reality itself. He described a moment when the fabric between dimensions became so thin that for the first time since humanity's spiritual fall, souls could actually perceive the path back to God consciousness. This wasn't metaphor. Cayce was describing an actual reorganization of spiritual physics. Before Christ's birth, according to Cayce's readings, humanity existed in what he termed the long night of the soul. Souls reincarnated endlessly, accumulating karma, learning lessons. But the ultimate doorway, the Christ consciousness that would allow complete reunion with the Creator, remained locked. Ancient prophets could sense this door existed. Mystery schools taught paths toward it, but nobody could open it from the inside. The law had to be fulfilled first. A bridge had to be built between the Creator's perfection and humanity's broken state. And that bridge, Cayce explained, required God himself to enter the prison of materiality. Now here's where Cayce's readings become almost unbearably profound. He described that in the spirit realm, the dimensions where discarnate souls dwell between incarnations, where entities who've never been physical exist, where what we'd call angels operate. There was an awareness building for centuries before that night in Bethlehem. Souls who had reached high levels of consciousness could sense something approaching. Cayce said these advanced souls actually volunteered to incarnate during this period, taking on difficult earthly lives just to be present when the dimensional shift occurred. They knew. The cosmos knew. The moment of Christ's actual birth, the instant that soul who had been preparing for this mission across countless ages finally merged with the infant body, Cayce described it as a shockwave of light that penetrated every dimension simultaneously. In the physical realm, yes, there was a baby born in obscurity, but in the spiritual planes, Cayce said it was as if every soul suddenly remembered who they really were. For just an instant, the veil lifted completely. Entities in the lower astral planes, those dark regions where confused earthbound spirits linger, suddenly saw light. Souls in higher dimensions experienced what Cayce called the Christ force, as an overwhelming presence of pure creative love that reorganized their very consciousness. This wasn't just beautiful poetry. Cayce was describing mechanics. Before Christ, the spiritual law was strict. You harvest what you sow, lifetime after lifetime, working off karmic debt, slowly ascending or descending based on your choices. The law was perfect, but merciless. After Christ's birth, and eventually his death, resurrection, and what Cayce called his complete victory over materiality, a new law became available, not replacing the old law, but transcending it. The law of grace. The law that says consciousness itself can transform instantly through alignment with the Christ force, rather than through endless karmic cycles alone. In the spirit world, this manifested as what Cayce described as souls suddenly having access to realms that had been closed to them. He talked about entities who had been trapped in lower dimensions, not because of punishment, but because their consciousness couldn't vibrate at higher frequencies, suddenly finding they could perceive and move toward the light. The birth opened something. The death and resurrection completed it. But that initial moment of birth was when the door first appeared in dimensions where no door had existed before. Think about what this means for you right now, in this body, in this life. You're living after this dimensional shift. The pathway Cayce described is available to your consciousness in ways it wasn't available to souls before Christ. This isn't about religion. This is about spiritual mechanics. The Christ consciousness that entered materiality didn't come to create a fan club. It came to show you the pattern of how consciousness returns to its source, how separation ends, how the illusion of death dissolves. Cayce's readings on Christ's birth reveal that souls who were present in that era, whether in physical form or discarnate, had the opportunity to experience this shift directly. But he emphasized that the shift wasn't limited to that historical moment. It created a permanent change in spiritual law. It's why he insisted that Christ is called the Way, not a way, but the Way, because the Christ force literally became the vibrational pathway through dimensional planes back to the Creator. Here's where this gets personal, almost uncomfortably so. Cayce taught that every human contains the potential for Christ consciousness. Not that you become Jesus of Nazareth, but that you access the same unified consciousness with the Father that he demonstrated. That moment of cosmic birth made this potential accessible to humanity in a way it hadn't been before. The spirit world didn't just witness a special baby being born. It witnessed the unlocking of human potential, the activation of a dormant spiritual capacity in every soul. The entities Cayce encountered in his readings, what he sometimes called the Masters, or Elder Brothers, conveyed that they had been preparing for Christ's entry into materiality for ages. These weren't angels in the traditional sense, but highly evolved souls who had completed their earthly cycles and now operated in service to the spiritual evolution of humanity. Cayce said these beings literally organized themselves around the coming event, creating what he described as channels of light, through dimensions to assist in stabilizing the tremendous spiritual energy that would enter the material plane through Christ. When that birth occurred, these entities experienced what Cayce described as an overwhelming sense of completion, like watching a master key finally slide into an ancient lock. Everything they had been working toward across thousands of years suddenly had its focal point in physical reality. The incarnation of God in matter, the impossible becoming possible, the infinite condensing into the finite without losing its infinity. But Cayce also revealed something darker. He spoke of entities in the lower spiritual planes who experienced Christ's birth not as liberation, but as threat. These weren't demons in a cartoon sense, but consciousness that had invested itself so deeply in separation, in power over others, in the illusion of materiality as ultimate reality, that the Christ light was perceived as an existential danger. Cayce described a kind of panic in these regions, entities trying to block the light, to maintain the old order, to keep souls imprisoned in the cycles they could manipulate. This is why the story of Herod's massacre of infants isn't just historical tragedy in Cayce's framework. It represented the material world's fear response to what was happening in spiritual dimensions. The old order, both physical and spiritual, could sense something fundamental changing, and anything invested in the old order would fight to destroy this change. Christ's birth initiated a war that's still playing out, not between armies but between consciousness that clings to separation and consciousness that yearns for unity. What's fascinating in Cayce's readings is his description of how different dimensional planes responded to Christ's birth in unique ways. In what he called the mental plane, where thought itself is the substance of reality, the birth appeared as a brilliant new pattern of divine thought suddenly available to all consciousness. Souls dwelling in this realm experienced Christ's entry, not as a physical event, but as the sudden appearance of a perfect thought form, a complete blueprint of how to reunite fragmented consciousness with its divine source. Cayce said entities in the mental plane, who had been searching for this pattern across eons, suddenly had the answer materialize before them. In the emotional or astral planes, where feeling and desire shape experience, the birth registered as an overwhelming wave of divine love, so pure that it temporarily dissolved the barriers souls had built around themselves through fear, guilt, and separation. Cayce described souls in these regions experiencing moments of profound peace, some for the first time in countless lifetimes. It was as if the Christ force, by entering the densest level of materiality, sent ripples of healing backwards through all the subtler dimensions, reaching souls who had forgotten what divine love even felt like. But here's what Cayce emphasized that most spiritual teachings miss. The birth didn't just affect disembodied souls. Every person alive on Earth that night, whether sleeping in China, hunting in Africa, or living in the Americas, experienced something in their consciousness, even if they couldn't articulate it. Cayce said the human collective unconscious registered the dimensional shift. Some woke from dreams feeling inexplicably hopeful. Others experienced visions they couldn't understand. Sensitive souls across the planet felt a change in the spiritual atmosphere, like the pressure shift before a storm, except this was the pressure of divine grace beginning to permeate a reality that had been operating under strict karmic law alone. Think about the magnitude of what Cayce was describing. This wasn't a localized event. The birth of Christ in Bethlehem was the focal point, but its effects rippled instantaneously through every level of existence, every dimension, every soul, incarnate or discarnate, throughout the entire cosmos. It was, in Cayce's words, the moment creation had been groaning toward since the fall. The moment when God's plan to rescue consciousness from its self-imposed exile finally manifested in the densest realm of matter. Cayce also spoke about how souls who had been Christ's companions in previous incarnations. Yes, Cayce taught that the soul who became Jesus had incarnated before, preparing for this ultimate mission, experienced the birth with a recognition that transcended normal human awareness. These were souls who had worked with this entity when he incarnated as Melchizedek, as Joseph in Egypt, as other figures preparing the way. In the spirit realm, when Christ was born, these companion souls experienced what Cayce described as a cosmic reunion, knowing that their friend, their teacher, their elder brother had finally taken on the mission that would change everything. Imagine being one of those souls, watching from spiritual dimensions as someone you journeyed with across ages finally steps into the role that the entire universe had been waiting for. The mixture of awe, fear, hope, and recognition must have been overwhelming. Cayce said some of these souls immediately incarnated as his disciples, drawn by soul memory to find him, to serve the mission they'd prepared lifetimes to support. And here's where Cayce's teaching becomes deeply challenging. He insisted that the dimensional shift Christ's birth created isn't something that happened back then and ended. It's ongoing. Every moment, the Christ force that entered materiality that night continues to permeate reality, continues to offer souls the pathway home, continues to transform consciousness that opens to it. The difference between someone who experiences this force and someone who doesn't isn't about God's favoritism, it's about consciousness. Are you aligned with the frequency? Have you opened the inner doorway that corresponds to the cosmic doorway Christ opened? Now, are you ready for the question that should be haunting you right now? If Christ's birth created this dimensional shift, this opening of pathways for souls, this activation of potential for Christ consciousness in every human, what are you doing with it? The spirit world reorganized itself around this moment. Souls volunteered for difficult incarnations just to be present when it occurred. The entire structure of how consciousness evolves was permanently altered. And you're living on the other side of that alteration. You have access to something souls before Christ could only dream of. The pathway is open. The Christ force is accessible. The reunion with God consciousness that seemed impossible is now mechanically possible through alignment with this force. So here's the mirror Cayce holds up to you. Are you living like someone who knows the door is open? Or are you living like someone still trapped in the long night of the soul, unaware that dawn broke 2,000 years ago? Because the tragedy Cayce witnessed in his readings wasn't people who rejected Christ. It was people who mentally accepted Christ but never aligned their consciousness with the Christ force. People who said the right words but lived from the old law, the old consciousness, the old separation. The moment Christ was born, the spirit world experienced liberation. Not everyone accepted it, not everyone wanted it, but it was offered to all. And it remains offered to you right now in whatever spiritual state you find yourself. The dimensional pathway that opened that night doesn't close. It doesn't require you to earn it. Christ already fulfilled the law. It requires you to recognize it, to align with it, to let your consciousness resonate with the frequency Cayce called the Christ force. This is why Cayce was so passionate about meditation, prayer, and what he called practical spirituality. He saw that most people were living as if Christ's birth changed nothing fundamental about how souls work. They might celebrate Christmas, might identify as Christian, but their consciousness operated from fear, separation, karmic reaction, all the patterns of the old order. Cayce wanted people to understand that when Christ entered materiality, he changed the rules, not by eliminating the old law, but by providing access to a higher law that transforms how the old law operates in your life. The spirit world knows this. The entities operating in higher dimensions organize themselves around this reality. They work to help souls recognize the open door, to guide consciousness toward the Christ force, to assist in the awakening that Christ's birth made possible. But they cannot force awakening. The law of free will remains absolute. You must choose to walk through the door that Christ's birth opened. And here's what might terrify you or liberate you, depending on where your consciousness is right now. Time is running out, not because of some apocalyptic deadline, but because you are in a body, and that body will die. When you transition out of materiality, your consciousness will be exactly what you've been cultivating in this life. If you've been cultivating Christ consciousness, if you've been aligning with that force, practicing the presence of God, letting your lower nature be transformed by your higher nature, then death will be what Cayce described as stepping through a doorway into fuller light. But if you've been living from the old consciousness, accumulating karma, serving self, avoiding the spiritual work, treating this life as merely physical existence, then death will be what Cayce called the borderland, a confused state where souls who never developed spiritual perception find themselves unable to move toward the light they cannot see. The moment Christ was born, the light became visible in dimensions where only darkness had existed. But you still have to choose to look toward it. You still have to align your consciousness with it. You still have to let it transform you from within. The door is open. The pathway exists. The Christ force is accessible right now, in this moment, as you're hearing these words. What happened in the spirit world when Christ was born was the universe saying, "Here is the way home." The entire cosmos reorganized itself to make your return to God consciousness possible. Masters prepared for millennia. Laws shifted. Dimensions opened. And a baby was born in Bethlehem who carried within him the full consciousness of the Creator, demonstrating that matter and spirit, human and divine, could unite completely. That unity is your destiny. That consciousness is your inheritance. That pathway is available to you now. The question burning in the silence after these words is, are you going to accept it? Are you going to align with it? Are you going to let your life, this precious incarnation, this opportunity to work with the Christ force while still in a body, become what it was meant to be? Or are you going to continue living as if the old night never ended, as if the door never opened, as if Christ's birth changed nothing about your soul's potential? The spirit world answered that question 2,000 years ago. The cosmos itself answered. Every dimension responded to that moment of birth with recognition that everything had changed. Now it's your turn to answer. And your answer isn't what you say, it's how you live. It's whether your consciousness aligns with the Christ force or resists it. It's whether you walk through the door that was opened for you or turn away from it. If you found this exploration meaningful, let me know by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. We're building a community of souls who take spiritual truth seriously. And please share in the comments. How does understanding the cosmic significance of Christ's birth change your approach to your own spiritual journey? Because we're all in this together, all trying to find our way home through the door that was opened for us. Let's support each other in that journey. For millions of years, countless souls incarnated on Earth, striving for spiritual perfection through trial and error, building civilizations that reached technological heights only to collapse under the weight of spiritual failure. Yet not a single soul had ever completed the journey back to full unity with God, while remaining in physical form until one specific soul finally cracked the code that had eluded humanity since consciousness first entered material reality. Edgar Cayce's readings reveal that what made Jesus of Nazareth cosmically significant wasn't his religious teachings or miraculous abilities, but that his soul had achieved something unprecedented in Earth's entire history, becoming the first perfected pattern that other souls could follow, the first human to demonstrate that divine consciousness and physical existence aren't mutually exclusive. Before this soul's incarnation, according to Cayce, every spiritual teacher, every enlightened being, every advanced soul had fallen short of complete perfection, close perhaps, but never crossing the final threshold while maintaining human form. This wasn't just another prophet bringing another message. This was the first time in millions of years of human spiritual evolution that a soul showed the complete pathway from material bondage to divine liberation without leaving physical reality. What does it mean that you're alive now, with access to this perfected pattern that souls in previous ages desperately sought but never found? Share your thoughts. Does knowing that Christ was the first soul to achieve complete perfection while incarnated change how you understand your own spiritual potential? There's a profound truth hidden in Edgar Cayce's readings that most people completely miss, even those familiar with his work. Jesus Christ wasn't important primarily because of what he taught or what miracles he performed, but because of what he was. The first soul in Earth's entire history to achieve absolute spiritual perfection while remaining in physical form. This wasn't merely impressive or admirable. According to Cayce, this was the single most transformative event in the multi-million-year journey of human consciousness, the breakthrough moment that changed the trajectory of every soul incarnating after it. To understand why this matters so profoundly, we need to grasp what Cayce meant by a perfected soul pattern, and why, despite millions of years of souls incarnating and evolving, no one had achieved this before. The implications aren't just historically interesting. They directly affect your spiritual journey right now in this lifetime, in ways that will become clear as we explore what Cayce actually revealed. In his trance readings, Cayce explained that souls began their earthly experiences millions of years ago, entering physical matter to gain experiences that would allow consciousness to know itself as creator. This wasn't a punishment or a fall from grace in the way some religious traditions teach. It was an intentional choice by spiritual beings who wanted to experience creation from within rather than merely observing it from a purely spiritual dimension. But something went wrong in the process. As souls became increasingly involved with physical matter, they became entrapped by it. The very material world that was supposed to be a temporary learning environment became a prison. Souls forgot their divine origin, became identified with physical bodies and physical experiences, and began making choices based on material desires rather than spiritual purpose. This created karma, spiritual consequences that required resolution through subsequent incarnations. One lifetime led to another, which led to another, creating cycles of rebirth that souls couldn't escape. Over hundreds of thousands of years, across multiple great civilizations that rose and fell, souls struggled to find the way back to full spiritual consciousness while still in physical form. Some achieved high levels of spiritual development. Cayce's readings mention numerous advanced souls throughout history, enlightened teachers, spiritual masters, psychic adepts who could perform remarkable feats and access higher dimensions of consciousness. But according to Cayce, none of them achieved complete perfection. They got close, perhaps very close, but something always remained. Some attachment, some karma, some tiny separation from absolute divine unity. This is crucial to understand. Cayce wasn't saying that spiritual teachers before Christ were frauds or failures. Many were genuinely advanced souls who helped humanity tremendously. Buddha, Krishna, various Egyptian initiates, Hebrew prophets, Cayce acknowledged their spiritual attainment. But he was adamant that none had achieved what he called the pattern, complete and total purification, to the point where human consciousness and divine consciousness became absolutely one, with no separation whatsoever. Why did this matter? Because without a perfected pattern, other souls had no clear map. They were trying to find their way back to God through intuition, through teachings that came close but weren't complete, through trial and error, across multiple lifetimes. It was like trying to solve an impossibly complex puzzle, with most of the pieces missing, and no picture showing what the completed puzzle should look like. Souls were making progress, yes, but blindly, slowly, with countless setbacks and dead ends. Then, according to Cayce's readings, one specific soul took a different approach. This soul decided to perfect itself gradually, methodically, through a series of strategic incarnations, each one building on the lessons and purification achieved in the previous life. Cayce identified this soul's previous incarnations, And the progression is fascinating because it shows intentional spiritual evolution across different historical periods and different roles. The first incarnation Cayce specifically identified was Adam. Now, before you dismiss this as merely repeating biblical mythology, understand that Cayce's description of Adam wasn't the literal first human being. Remember, souls had been incarnating for millions of years before the biblical timeline. Rather, Adam represented this particular soul's first incarnation in what we might call the current cycle of humanity after the destructions of previous civilizations. This incarnation established the soul's mission to demonstrate the pathway back to spiritual perfection after the fall into material consciousness. But the Adam incarnation, while significant, didn't achieve perfection. That soul, like all souls, made choices that created karma requiring resolution. So the soul incarnated again, this time as Enoch. The biblical account of Enoch is mysterious. It says he walked with God and was taken directly into heaven without experiencing death. Cayce's readings suggest this incarnation achieved a higher level of spiritual attunement than Adam, but still wasn't the complete perfection needed to establish the pattern. The same soul incarnated again as Melchizedek, the mysterious priest-king mentioned in Genesis, who blessed Abraham. This incarnation represented another step forward, a soul functioning as both spiritual teacher and temporal leader, demonstrating that spirituality doesn't require withdrawal from the world, but can be expressed through active engagement with material life. Still, even Melchizedek didn't achieve absolute perfection. Cayce's readings mention other incarnations of this same soul, as Joseph, son of Jacob, and others, each lifetime progressively purifying, learning, overcoming. Each incarnation resolved some karma, developed some spiritual quality, moved closer to the ultimate goal. This wasn't random reincarnation, it was a deliberately planned spiritual curriculum spanning thousands of years. Then came the incarnation as Jesus of Nazareth, and according to Cayce, this time the soul had finally purified itself sufficiently to maintain complete divine consciousness while in physical form. Every attachment had been overcome, every karmic debt had been paid, every lesson had been learned, every spiritual quality had been perfected. For the first time in Earth's history, a human being existed who was entirely, absolutely, completely attuned to divine will with zero separation. This is what Cayce meant by the pattern. Jesus wasn't just teaching spiritual principles or demonstrating spiritual powers. He was being the complete solution, the living answer to the question that souls had been struggling with for millions of years. How do you fully express divine consciousness while in material form? How do you live as both human and divine simultaneously? How do you complete the spiritual journey and reunite with God without leaving physical reality? The perfected pattern wasn't a set of instructions or teachings, though Jesus certainly taught. It was an actual lived example, a demonstration that could be studied and replicated. Every action Jesus took, every word he spoke, every choice he made, came from a place of perfect, divine attunement. Other souls could now observe and learn. This is what it looks like. This is how it works. This is the standard you're aiming for. But Cayce's readings go even deeper into why this was so transformative. He explained that Jesus' achievement didn't just provide an example, it actually changed the spiritual dynamics for all other souls. When one soul achieved perfect attunement while in physical form, it proved that matter and spirit could be completely unified. This broke down a spiritual barrier that had existed since souls first became entrapped in material consciousness. Think of it this way. Before Jesus, there was a sense among souls that perhaps full divine consciousness and physical existence were simply incompatible, that you had to leave the body to return to complete spiritual awareness. Jesus demonstrated definitively that this wasn't true. The human form could hold and express complete divine consciousness. Matter could be spiritualized. The physical world could be a vehicle for divine expression rather than an obstacle to it. Cayce used the term Christ consciousness to describe this state of perfect attunement, and he was careful to distinguish between Jesus the man and Christ the spiritual state. Jesus was the person, the specific soul who incarnated, Christ consciousness was the spiritual condition of complete divine unity that Jesus achieved and embodied. According to Cayce, Christ consciousness is the goal for every soul. It's what we're all working toward across all our incarnations. But here's where it gets profoundly personal. Cayce's readings make clear that you couldn't achieve Christ consciousness before the pattern was demonstrated. But now you can. The perfected pattern exists. The pathway has been shown. What took that particular soul multiple strategic incarnations across thousands of years to achieve progressively is now available to any soul willing to follow the pattern that's been revealed. This doesn't mean it's easy, or that you can accomplish it in a single lifetime. Most souls won't. But it means you have something that souls in previous ages didn't have. A clear, complete, demonstrated example of what you're trying to become and how to get there. You're not stumbling in the dark anymore. You're not guessing or hoping. You have the map. Consider what this means for your current incarnation. If you're alive now, after the pattern has been established, then your soul chose to incarnate with access to this knowledge. You have an advantage that countless advanced souls in previous civilizations would have desperately wanted. The spiritual masters of ancient Atlantis, the enlightened teachers of prehistoric humanity, the adepts of early Egypt, they were all searching for what you now have available. But advantage creates responsibility. Cayce's readings repeatedly emphasize that spiritual knowledge brings spiritual obligation. If you know the pattern exists, if you understand that Christ consciousness is achievable, if you're aware that Jesus demonstrated the complete pathway, then you're accountable for what you do with that knowledge. You can't claim ignorance, you can't say the way wasn't shown. So let's get practical about what the perfected soul pattern actually looked like in Jesus' life, because this is where Cayce's readings become a manual for your own spiritual development. What qualities characterized this first perfected soul? What did absolute divine attunement look like in daily life? First, according to Cayce, Jesus maintained complete selflessness. Not the performance of selflessness that seeks recognition, but genuine absence of self-centered motivation. Every action was about serving others and expressing divine will, never about personal gain, comfort, or recognition. This wasn't suppression of a selfish nature. It was transcendence of selfishness itself. Second, perfect forgiveness. Cayce's readings emphasize that Jesus held no resentment, no judgment, no condemnation toward anyone, even those who tortured and killed him. This wasn't merely ethical behavior or spiritual discipline. It was the natural expression of consciousness that sees everyone as divine beings, struggling through material experience, exactly as he had struggled in previous incarnations. Third, absolute trust in divine provision. Jesus never worried, never manipulated situations for personal security, never accumulated possessions or built safety nets. This wasn't recklessness. It was complete confidence that alignment with divine will automatically brings everything needed for one's purpose. Fourth, perfect love. Not sentimental emotion or preferential attachment, but unconditional love that sees the divine spark in every being and responds to that divinity, regardless of external behavior or circumstances. Cayce described this as seeing others as God sees them, not as their current flawed personalities, but as their true spiritual potential. Fifth, complete surrender of personal will. Jesus had individual thoughts and preferences. He was human, but never acted on them when they conflicted with divine guidance. The prayer in Gethsemane, "Not my will but thine," represented his consistent state of consciousness, not a special moment of sacrifice. Now, reading this list, you might think, that's impossible for me. I'm selfish, I hold grudges, I worry constantly, my love is conditional, and I'm definitely willful. You're right, in your current state it is impossible. But that's not the point. The point is that you now know what you're working toward, and you know that it's achievable because one soul has already achieved it. The perfected pattern shows you where the path leads and what the destination looks like. Your job isn't to achieve it immediately. Remember, it took that soul multiple lifetimes of progressive purification. Your job is to consistently move in that direction, making choices in this lifetime that develop those qualities, even incrementally. Every time you choose service over selfishness, you're following the pattern. Every time you forgive rather than hold resentment, you're following the pattern. Every time you trust divine guidance rather than manipulate circumstances, you're following the pattern. Every time you respond with love rather than judgment, you're following the pattern. Every time you surrender your personal will to higher guidance, you're following the pattern. These choices might seem small and insignificant in the moment, but Cayce's readings make clear that spiritual evolution happens through countless small choices accumulating across lifetimes. You're not trying to become perfect in this incarnation. You're trying to move measurably closer to perfection than you were in your previous incarnations. That's the realistic goal, and it's absolutely achievable. But here's what many people miss. Cayce wasn't just describing an abstract spiritual ideal or ancient historical figure. He was explaining that the pattern continues to be available. Christ consciousness, the state Jesus achieved, remains accessible to every soul. The same divine power that flowed through Jesus is available to flow through you. The same perfect attunement he demonstrated is possible for you to experience, at least in moments, even if not constantly maintained yet. If you're feeling this content resonate with something deep in your soul, consider liking this video and subscribing to this channel. We explore Edgar Cayce's most profound teachings about soul perfection, Christ consciousness, and the spiritual practices that align you with the pattern Jesus demonstrated. Your engagement helps these transformative truths reach other souls who are ready to seriously pursue spiritual perfection rather than settling for superficial spirituality. This raises an important question. If the pattern exists and is available, why do so few people seem to be following it? Why does humanity still appear so far from Christ consciousness, despite having access to the demonstrated pathway for over 2,000 years? Cayce's readings provide an uncomfortable answer. Having access to the pattern and choosing to follow it are completely different things. The pattern doesn't automatically transform you. You have to actively, consistently, persistently align your consciousness with it through your daily choices. And that requires something most people aren't willing to give: total commitment to spiritual transformation, regardless of the personal cost. Following the perfected pattern means releasing everything that keeps you identified with material consciousness: your attachments, your resentments, your ego gratifications, your control over circumstances, your preferences for comfort and security. It means allowing your entire sense of self to be transformed from "I am this body with this personality pursuing these material goals" to "I am divine consciousness temporarily expressing through this physical form for spiritual purposes." That level of transformation is terrifying to the ego self. Your entire identity structure resists it. Everything in material culture tells you it's unnecessary, extreme, impractical. Even religious institutions often water down the actual requirements, offering gentle spirituality that makes you feel good without demanding real transformation. But Cayce's readings were uncompromising. If you want to achieve Christ consciousness, you have to surrender everything that isn't aligned with divine will. This is why Jesus said following him meant taking up your cross, not as punishment, but because genuine spiritual transformation requires the death of your false material identified self. The pattern isn't cruel, it's just honest about what's required to move from material consciousness to divine consciousness. You can't keep both. You have to choose. Now consider your own life right now. Are you actually following the pattern, or are you just appreciating it from a comfortable distance? Are you making daily choices that progressively align you with selflessness, forgiveness, trust, unconditional love, and surrender of personal will? Or are you pursuing spiritual knowledge as an interesting hobby while continuing to live primarily for material goals and ego satisfactions? This isn't judgment, it's a necessary self-examination. According to Cayce, souls can spend multiple lifetimes appreciating spiritual truth intellectually, without actually applying it transformatively. You can accumulate enormous spiritual knowledge and remain fundamentally unchanged. Knowledge about the pattern isn't the same as following the pattern. The first perfected soul achieved what it achieved because it actually, consistently, completely did what needed to be done across multiple lifetimes. Not talked about it, not thought about it, not appreciated it. Did it. Made the hard choices, surrendered the attachments, forgave the unforgivable, trusted when circumstances screamed for control, loved the unlovable, over and over and over, across thousands of years and multiple incarnations, chose spiritual alignment over material gratification. That's what it took to become the first perfected pattern. And while you now have the advantage of seeing that pattern clearly, you still have to walk the path yourself. No one can do it for you. Jesus showed the way, but you have to actually walk it. Here's the transformative question Cayce's readings force you to confront. Are you willing to do what's required to follow the pattern? Not in theory or aspiration, but in actual daily practice. Are you willing to genuinely forgive people who've hurt you? Are you willing to surrender control and trust divine guidance even when circumstances seem threatening? Are you willing to serve others' needs ahead of your own desires? Are you willing to love people who oppose you? These aren't rhetorical questions. Your answers to them, demonstrated through your actual choices, determine whether you're genuinely following the perfected pattern or just admiring it from a safe distance. And those choices determine whether your current incarnation moves you significantly closer to Christ consciousness or merely keeps you spinning in the same patterns you've been repeating for potentially thousands of years. The first perfected soul didn't appear randomly in history. According to Cayce, that soul incarnated when it incarnated, because it had finally prepared itself through previous lifetimes to achieve complete perfection. It had done the work, it had learned the lessons, it had resolved the karma, it was ready. You're alive now with access to that perfected pattern because your soul is ready for something. Maybe you're ready to finally take spiritual transformation seriously instead of treating it as optional. Maybe you're ready to make the hard choices you've been avoiding across multiple lifetimes. Maybe you're ready to stop settling for incremental progress and commit fully to achieving Christ consciousness, however many additional incarnations that requires. Share your honest reflection in the comments. Knowing that Christ was the first soul to achieve complete perfection through consistent choices across multiple lifetimes, does that change your understanding of what spiritual transformation actually requires? Are you willing to make the daily choices necessary to genuinely follow the pattern, or have you been treating spirituality as interesting knowledge rather than transformative practice? This community is for souls ready to pursue actual perfection, not comfortable spirituality. Your honest self-examination contributes to collective awakening. The perfected pattern exists. The pathway has been shown. The first soul completed the journey and demonstrated that it's possible. Now the question is whether you'll actually walk the path that's been revealed, or whether you'll spend this lifetime, and potentially many more, appreciating spiritual truth from a comfortable distance while making choices that keep you bound to material consciousness. Millions of years of souls struggling in darkness, trying to find the way back to God through trial and error. Then one soul finally achieved it, becoming the first perfected pattern. And now you're here, with access to everything that soul learned and demonstrated, with the advantage of seeing the complete pathway. What you do with that advantage determines everything. You can waste it, pursuing the same material illusions that have trapped souls for eons, or you can honor it, making daily choices that progressively align you with the pattern of selflessness, forgiveness, trust, love, and surrender that Jesus demonstrated. The first perfected soul showed that complete divine consciousness, while in physical form, is possible. You can't unknow that now. You can't pretend the standard hasn't been set or the pathway hasn't been shown. The only question is whether you'll rise to meet that standard through your actual choices, starting today, or whether you'll continue settling for something less than what your soul came here to achieve. The pattern exists. The first soul completed it. Now it's your turn to decide whether you'll actually follow it. The man lying unconscious on a worn couch in 1923 began speaking about the birth of Jesus Christ, and what came out contradicted nearly every Christmas sermon you've ever heard. Edgar Cayce, in one of his most controversial readings, revealed that Christ's arrival wasn't the romantic manger scene painted by centuries of tradition, but a cosmic event that had been prepared for thousands of years across multiple civilizations and dimensions of reality. He described how Jesus, the man, was chosen, how Mary was prepared from childhood through ancient mystery schools, and how the Christ consciousness, a universal divine force, descended into human form through a process most churches refuse to acknowledge. What Cayce revealed challenges the very foundation of how Christianity understands the Incarnation, suggesting that this birth was the culmination of humanity's spiritual evolution, not a random divine intervention. The implications are staggering. If Cayce was right, then the real story of Christ's birth reveals your own potential for divine transformation. What does this ancient truth mean for your soul's journey right now? Share in the comments what aspect of Christ's birth you've always questioned, but never dared to ask about. The story you've been told about the birth of Christ is incomplete, not false, incomplete. And the missing pieces, according to Edgar Cayce Readings given while in deep trance states, reveal a preparation for this cosmic event that stretches back through millennia, across civilizations, and into dimensions of reality most people never consider. This isn't about debunking faith. It's about expanding your understanding of what actually happened when divinity chose to enter human form and why it matters desperately for your life today. Cayce explained that the being we know as Jesus was not a random choice by God. The soul that would become Jesus had incarnated many times before, preparing specifically for this ultimate mission. In his readings, Cayce revealed that this soul had lived as Adam, as Enoch, as Melchizedek, and as other significant spiritual figures throughout human history. Each lifetime was a preparation, a refinement, a step closer to the purity and consciousness necessary to hold the Christ force, the divine consciousness of God, within a human body. This isn't reincarnation as most people misunderstand it. This was a deliberate, guided evolution of a soul specifically chosen and trained across centuries to become the vessel for humanity's salvation. Every mistake in those previous lives was a lesson. Every triumph was a strengthening. The soul that would be Jesus was being forged in the fires of human experience, learning compassion through suffering, wisdom through error, love through rejection. By the time this soul incarnated as the baby in Bethlehem, it had already lived more lifetimes of spiritual development than most souls experience in their entire existence, across all dimensions. But here's where it gets even more profound. Mary wasn't simply a young virgin who happened to be chosen. According to Cayce, Mary herself was a highly evolved soul who had been prepared for this role through the Essene community, a mystical Jewish sect that understood spiritual truths hidden from mainstream Judaism. From childhood, Mary was trained in the mystery schools, taught ancient wisdom, and prepared mentally, physically, and spiritually to carry a child who would bear the Christ consciousness. The Essenes, Cayce revealed, knew the Messiah was coming. They had prophets among them who had received visions and instructions. They carefully selected and prepared young women who might potentially be the mother of the Messiah. Mary was among the most devoted, the most pure in intention, the most spiritually advanced. She wasn't surprised by the angel's announcement. She had been preparing for this possibility her entire life. Her yes to God wasn't a naive acceptance of something she didn't understand. It was the culmination of years of spiritual discipline, meditation, prayer, and preparation for the most important mission a human soul could receive. Joseph, too, was no mere carpenter who accidentally ended up with a pregnant fiancée. He was an Essene initiate, a man of deep spiritual understanding who recognized the significance of what was happening. His agreement to marry Mary and protect her wasn't just kindness, it was spiritual duty. He understood, at least partially, that this child was unlike any other that would be born. Now consider the birth itself. Cayce explained that the Christ consciousness, which he described as the awareness of oneness with God that exists in all dimensions, descended into the infant Jesus at birth. This wasn't possession, this was invitation and reception. The soul of Jesus had prepared for eons to receive this divine consciousness. The body of Jesus, carried by Mary, had been prepared through her purity and spiritual practice to contain such intensity of divine energy. The moment of birth was the moment when heaven and earth literally merged in one human form. But why a manger? Why such humble circumstances? Cayce revealed that this wasn't poverty or accident. It was symbolism and spiritual law in action. The Christ couldn't enter through privilege, power, or prestige, because those things create separation between humans. Christ had to enter through the door that was open to everyone: humility, simplicity, and vulnerability. A palace would have made Jesus inaccessible to common people. A manger made him one of them from the first breath. The shepherds who came weren't random peasants. In Cayce's readings, he suggested that these were Essenes who had been told to watch, to wait, to recognize the signs. The star that appeared wasn't just a pretty light in the sky. It was a celestial event, marking a shift in cosmic consciousness, a dimensional doorway opening, a signal to those with spiritual sight that the impossible was happening. The wise men from the East weren't just following astronomy. They were following ancient prophecies and mystical knowledge that crossed cultural boundaries, recognizing that this birth affected all of humanity, not just the Jewish people. Here's what this means for you. Cayce taught that what happened at Christ's birth established a pattern for every human soul. Christ came to show you what you can become. The divine consciousness that entered Jesus is the same consciousness available to you. Not that you will become Jesus, but that you can awaken the Christ within you, the awareness of your oneness with God, the expression of divine love through your human experience. Most people celebrate Christmas without understanding they're celebrating their own potential. When you honor Christ's birth, you're honoring the moment when God proved that divinity and humanity can merge, that heaven can exist on earth, that you are not separate from your Creator. Jesus didn't come to be worshipped as a distant deity. He came to be followed as an elder brother, showing you the path home. But, and this is critical, Cayce emphasized that this path requires the same preparation that Jesus underwent, that Mary underwent, that Joseph underwent. You cannot stumble into Christ consciousness. You cannot fake your way into divine union. It requires purification of motive, discipline of mind, opening of heart, and surrender of ego. It requires you to face your own incarnations, not necessarily past lives, but the many selves you've been even in this lifetime. Every version of you that has acted from fear, from selfishness, from separation, those must be acknowledged, learned from, and transformed. The birth of Christ externally 2,000 years ago was a historical event. The birth of Christ internally within your consciousness is an ongoing possibility that most people never activate, because they don't understand what it actually requires. They want salvation without transformation. They want heaven without the inner work. They want to celebrate the baby in the manger without becoming like him. Cayce revealed that the angels who appeared to the shepherds weren't just announcing one birth. They were announcing the potential birth available to every human soul, the birth of divine consciousness within human form. Peace on earth, goodwill toward men wasn't a nice sentiment. It was a description of what happens when enough humans awaken the Christ within themselves. Peace becomes inevitable. Goodwill becomes natural. The kingdom of heaven manifests on earth not through God's intervention, but through humanity's transformation. The wise men brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh, not random gifts, but symbols of kingship, divinity, and death. They recognized that this child would be a king of consciousness, would embody divinity in human form, and would face death as the ultimate initiation. Your own spiritual birth requires the same elements. You must claim your spiritual authority, your gold. You must recognize your own divine nature, your frankincense, and you must be willing to let your false self die, your myrrh. Most people's spiritual lives are stuck in perpetual pregnancy. They know something divine wants to be born through them. They feel the stirring of higher consciousness, but they won't go through the labor, the pain, the vulnerability, the complete surrender that actual birth requires. They want immaculate conception without the incarnation. They want the miracle without the manger. Cayce taught that the real miracle of Christ's birth wasn't that a virgin conceived, although that was miraculous. The real miracle was that a human being so purified their consciousness, so aligned themselves with divine will, so completely became a channel for God's love, that the Christ force could be born through them and walk the earth, teaching, healing, and ultimately demonstrating that death itself has no power over divine consciousness. Think about your life right now. What's trying to be born through you that you keep aborting through fear, through distraction, through belief that you're not worthy or ready? What divine potential lives in your soul that you've never given permission to incarnate into your daily reality? The story of Christ's birth isn't ancient history. It's a template, a possibility, a calling. The census that brought Mary and Joseph to Bethlehem, Cayce hinted this wasn't just Roman bureaucracy, but divine orchestration. Everything aligned. The place, the time, the people, the circumstances, all of it was preparation meeting opportunity, meeting willingness. How often does your life present you with the perfect circumstances for spiritual breakthrough, but you're too busy complaining about the inconvenience to recognize the opportunity? Consider what Mary went through. She faced potential stoning for unwed pregnancy. She risked Joseph's rejection. She endured a difficult journey while 9 months pregnant. She gave birth in primitive conditions. Yet she said yes to all of it because she understood her yes was bigger than her comfort. What are you saying no to because it's inconvenient, because it's uncomfortable, because it's not what you planned? The innkeeper who turned them away didn't know what he was rejecting. He wasn't being cruel, he was being practical. His inn was full. He had paying customers. But he missed the opportunity to host the birth of God in human form because he was focused on his normal business. How many times has divinity knocked on your door and you've been too busy with your normal life to answer? How many times has Christ tried to be born through your choices, your words, your actions, and you've said, "Sorry, I'm full. Try somewhere else"? The manger itself is profound symbolism. It was a feeding trough for animals. The Christ was born in the place where hungry creatures came to be fed. And for the next 33 years, that's exactly what Jesus did. He fed hungry souls. He was born into his purpose. The place of his birth was a prophecy of his mission. Where were you born? Not geographically, spiritually. What were the circumstances of your spiritual awakening? Because those circumstances often contain clues about your soul's mission. Cayce emphasized that the Christ child grew. He didn't emerge from the womb teaching sermons. He learned, he studied, he traveled, he prepared. From age 12 to 30, Jesus was largely absent from biblical record. But Cayce revealed he was traveling to India, to Persia, to Egypt, studying with spiritual masters, learning ancient wisdom, preparing his consciousness for public ministry. The Christ consciousness was present within him from birth, but it took years of study and practice for Jesus the man to fully embody and express it. This destroys the excuse that you're not ready for your spiritual mission. Jesus himself needed preparation. He needed teachers. He needed years of study and practice. But notice, he was actively pursuing that preparation. He wasn't waiting to feel ready. He was making himself ready. Are you waiting for spiritual maturity to just happen, or are you actively seeking the knowledge, the practices, the discipline that will prepare you for your mission? The star that guided the wise men. Cayce suggested it was actually Venus in a particular alignment, but more importantly, it was a symbol of the inner light that guides every soul toward truth. You have your own star. It's the inner knowing, the intuition, the pull toward something greater than your current life. But like the wise men, you have to follow it. You have to leave your comfortable kingdom, your familiar territory, your normal life, and travel toward where that star leads, even if the journey is long and difficult. Those wise men brought expensive gifts to a poor family in a stable. They recognized true wealth when they saw it. They understood that the treasure lying in that feeding trough was worth more than all their kingdoms combined. What treasures are you hoarding for yourself that need to be laid at the feet of your own Christ consciousness? What gifts are you refusing to offer because the setting seems too humble, too small, too insignificant? Herod's reaction to news of the birth is equally telling. He felt threatened by a baby. Why? Because he knew at some level that this child represented the end of kingdoms built on power and fear. Christ consciousness threatens every false authority in your life. Your ego, your addictions, your limiting beliefs, your attachment to suffering. When Christ starts to be born within you, everything false in your life will feel threatened and will try to kill it before it grows strong enough to overthrow your inner tyranny. Mary kept all these things and pondered them in her heart. She didn't broadcast everything. She didn't need external validation. She held the mystery, meditated on it, let it transform her from within. In our age of social media and constant sharing, this is radical wisdom. Some spiritual experiences are meant to be private, to be treasured, to be protected from the judgment and misunderstanding of others until they're strong enough to withstand scrutiny. The shepherds returned to their fields glorifying God. They went back to normal life, but they were changed. They had witnessed the impossible, and it transformed their ordinary work into worship. This is the test of authentic spiritual experience. Does it help you transcend normal life, or does it help you transform normal life into something sacred? Running away to a monastery might feel spiritual, but can you remain in your regular life and let it become your temple? Here's the uncomfortable question Cayce's readings force you to confront. Is Christ being born in you, or are you stuck in spiritual barrenness? Have you prepared the manger of your heart, or is there no room for divinity? Because you're full of lesser things. Are you traveling toward your Bethlehem, the place where your spiritual purpose will manifest? Or are you comfortable in your current kingdom, refusing the difficult journey? The real birth of Christ wasn't just a historical event in Judea 2 millennia ago. It's an eternal possibility occurring in every soul that becomes willing, prepared, and surrendered enough to host divine consciousness. But it will cost you everything false. It will require you to say yes to things you don't fully understand. It will take you on journeys you didn't plan. It will birth you into a mission that frightens your ego and threatens your comfort. If you're still celebrating Christmas as merely a nice holiday about a baby in a manger, you're missing the entire point. That baby came to show you what you must become. That birth happened to prove that your birth into Christ consciousness is possible. That star appeared to show you that your own inner light can guide you home. Those angels sang to announce that your salvation isn't a future event. It's a present possibility requiring only your cooperation with the divine plan already written in your soul. So I'll ask you what the universe is asking you right now. Is there room in your inn? Will you make the journey? Will you say yes to the angel's announcement, even though you don't understand all the implications? Will you let Christ be born in you? Or will you keep aborting divine potential because the circumstances aren't perfect, the timing isn't convenient, or the cost seems too high? The real birth of Christ happens when you stop being a spectator, celebrating someone else's spiritual achievement, and become a participant in your own divine incarnation. Everything else is just religious nostalgia. This is transformation. This is why you're here. This is what your soul has been preparing for across every experience, every challenge, every lifetime. The question is, are you ready to give birth to who you truly are? What if the moment your physical body turns to ash is actually the precise instant your soul begins its most important journey toward rebirth? Edgar Cayce, America's most documented psychic, revealed in his trance readings that cremation doesn't just dispose of the body. It catalyzes a specific pathway of consciousness that determines how quickly and consciously your soul prepares for its next incarnation. In his readings on reincarnation and the death process, Cayce explained something that shocked even experienced spiritual seekers. The method by which your body returns to the elements directly influences your soul's journey through the dimensions between lives. Before we explore these life-altering revelations, subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because we're about to uncover documented truths from Edgar Cayce's readings that could completely transform how you understand the soul's eternal journey. And leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on reincarnation and whether you believe your current life is part of a larger soul mission. The connection between cremation and rebirth that Edgar Cayce revealed in his readings goes far beyond what most people understand about the afterlife. This isn't just about what happens when you die. This is about how the choices made at death set the entire trajectory for your soul's next incarnation and the lessons you'll face in your future life. Edgar Cayce gave over 14,000 documented psychic readings between 1901 and 1944, and hundreds of these readings specifically addressed the soul's journey between incarnations. What makes Cayce's insight so revolutionary is that he didn't just describe death as an ending or rebirth as a beginning. He revealed the intricate process of consciousness transformation that happens in the space between lives, and how cremation serves as a spiritual accelerator in this sacred process. When Cayce entered his trance state, he accessed what he called the Akashic records, the cosmic repository of every soul's journey through multiple lifetimes. Through this connection, he could see not just what happens after death, but how the soul prepares itself for rebirth, choosing its next parents, planning its lessons, and even selecting the challenges it will face in order to grow spiritually. But here's where Cayce's teachings become profoundly important for understanding consciousness and rebirth. In his readings on reincarnation, Cayce explained that the soul doesn't randomly reincarnate into a new body. Instead, there's a deliberate preparation period that happens in higher dimensions of consciousness, what Cayce called the planetary sojourns. During this time, the soul reviews its past lives, understands its karmic patterns, and consciously plans its next incarnation based on what it still needs to learn. The shocking revelation that Cayce shared is that cremation significantly affects how consciously a soul moves through this preparation period. When the physical body is cremated, Cayce explained, the soul's attachment to material existence is severed more completely and more quickly than with traditional burial. This rapid severance allows the soul to move into the higher dimensions with greater awareness and less confusion about its true spiritual nature. Think about this for a moment. Cayce revealed that souls who are buried often maintain an energetic connection to their decomposing physical form for months or even years. Part of the soul's consciousness remains focused on the earth plane, monitoring what's happening to the body, aware of its slow dissolution. This divided attention, Cayce said, can delay the soul's full transition into the consciousness review and planning stages that prepare it for rebirth. But with cremation, this attachment is released almost immediately. The fire serves as what Cayce called a purification gateway, a dramatic energetic shift that signals to the soul that its time in physical form is completely finished. This allows the soul to turn its full attention to the spiritual dimensions where rebirth preparation happens. Here's what this means for your soul's evolution. Cayce taught that between incarnations, the soul moves through specific dimensional planes, each associated with different planetary influences. These aren't physical locations, but rather states of consciousness where the soul learns specific spiritual lessons. The soul might spend time in what Cayce called the Venus consciousness, learning about love and relationships, or it might journey through the Mars consciousness, understanding courage and assertive action. Each planetary sojourn prepares the soul for different aspects of its next earthly incarnation. The crucial insight that Cayce revealed is that souls who transition through cremation often move through these planetary sojourns with greater awareness and intention. Because they're not distracted by lingering attachment to their previous physical form, they can focus more completely on the spiritual lessons each dimensional plane offers. But wait, here's where Cayce's revelations about cremation and rebirth become even more fascinating. Cayce explained that the soul doesn't just passively experience these between-life dimensions. Instead, the soul actively chooses which planetary sojourns to visit, based on what it needs to develop for its next incarnation. A soul preparing to incarnate into a life focused on artistic expression might spend extended time in the Neptune consciousness, developing creativity and spiritual sensitivity. A soul preparing for a life of leadership and service might focus its between-life journey in the Jupiter consciousness, expanding its understanding of wisdom and benevolence. Cremation, Cayce revealed, helps the soul make these choices more consciously because it removes the fog of material attachment that can cloud spiritual vision. When a soul is no longer distracted by awareness of its decomposing physical body, it can see more clearly what lessons it needs for its spiritual evolution and which planetary dimensions will best prepare it for its next life mission. This brings us to something that will completely change how you think about reincarnation and life planning. In his readings, Cayce explained that before a soul reincarnates, it goes through what he called the selection process. During this phase, the soul reviews multiple potential incarnation opportunities, examining different sets of parents, different geographic locations, different life circumstances, and different karmic situations. The soul literally chooses the life conditions that will give it the best opportunity to learn its needed lessons and fulfill its spiritual purpose. Here's the remarkable part that Cayce revealed about cremation's influence on this selection process. Souls who transition through cremation, Cayce explained, often make more conscious and spiritually advanced choices during the selection process. Because these souls have moved through the planetary sojourns with greater awareness, they have a clearer understanding of their spiritual needs and purpose. They're more likely to choose challenging incarnations that offer significant growth opportunities rather than comfortable incarnations that might allow them to avoid difficult lessons. Think about what this means for spiritual evolution. If you choose cremation with spiritual understanding and intention, you're essentially setting up your consciousness to make more evolved choices for your next life. You're giving your soul the best possible conditions for conscious spiritual planning during the between-life period. But here's something even more profound that Cayce revealed about consciousness between lives. Cayce taught that souls don't lose their awareness or personality during the between-life period. Instead, they gain expanded awareness that includes all their past incarnations. When your soul moves into the higher dimensions after death, it suddenly remembers every life it has ever lived, every lesson it has learned, and every pattern it still needs to transform. This expanded awareness, Cayce explained, is what allows the soul to plan its next incarnation with wisdom and purpose. Cremation supports this expansion of awareness by removing the heaviest anchor to physical identity, the slowly decomposing body. When the body is cremated, the soul no longer has a physical reference point pulling it back to limited earthly consciousness. It can more fully embrace its true identity as an eternal being that has lived many lives and will live many more. Here's where this connects directly to your current incarnation and spiritual mission. Cayce revealed that every soul incarnates with specific purposes and lessons. Before you were born into this current life, your soul spent time in the planetary dimensions, preparing for the experiences you're having right now. Your soul chose your parents, your circumstances, your challenges, and your opportunities based on what it needed to learn and accomplish in this incarnation. Understanding this soul planning process helps you see your current life with completely different eyes. The challenges you face aren't random or punishments. They're precisely what your soul chose before incarnating, because these experiences offer the exact lessons you need for spiritual growth. The relationships in your life aren't accidents. They're soul connections that you arranged before birth to help you work through karmic patterns and develop spiritually. But here's the question that Cayce's teachings force you to confront right now. Are you living the life your soul planned? Or have you gotten so distracted by material concerns and ego desires that you've forgotten your true spiritual mission? This is where Cayce's insights about cremation and rebirth become powerfully relevant to your present moment. When you understand that your soul will eventually leave this body and prepare for another incarnation, you start to see your current life as one chapter in a much longer story. This perspective can transform everything about how you live today. Cayce taught that souls who live with awareness of reincarnation and the eternal journey of consciousness make very different choices than souls who believe this life is all there is. Souls who understand their eternal beings focus less on accumulating material possessions and more on developing spiritual qualities that carry forward into future lives. They focus less on short-term pleasures and more on long-term spiritual growth. Here's something that will help you understand your own spiritual evolution. Cayce explained that souls reincarnate in groups, meeting the same souls lifetime after lifetime in different relationships and circumstances. The person who is your parent in this life might have been your child in a previous life. The person who is your spouse now might have been your sibling or friend in another incarnation. These soul groups reincarnate together to help each other learn and grow spiritually. This means that the people closest to you in this life are souls you've known for many lifetimes. You've made agreements with these souls before incarnating to help each other face specific lessons and overcome particular challenges. Understanding this can completely transform how you approach your relationships. Every difficult interaction becomes an opportunity to work through old karmic patterns. Every loving connection becomes a chance to deepen eternal soul bonds. But wait, here's where Cayce's teachings about cremation connect to these soul relationships in a surprising way. Cayce revealed that when someone chooses cremation, they're signaling to their soul group that they're ready to release attachment to the physical identity they held in that lifetime. This release makes it easier for soul group members to recognize each other in future incarnations because they're not stuck in the mental patterns and personality traits of their previous identity. Think of it this way. When a soul remains attached to its previous physical form through the slow process of bodily decomposition, it tends to hold onto the personality, beliefs, and patterns of that lifetime for longer periods. But when cremation rapidly releases the physical attachment, the soul more quickly remembers its true eternal identity and the deeper connections it has with other souls across many lifetimes. This is why Cayce often indicated that spiritually advanced souls, those who have lived many incarnations and understand the eternal nature of consciousness, frequently choose cremation. They recognize that releasing physical attachment quickly serves their spiritual evolution and helps them maintain clearer awareness of their soul mission and relationships. Here's what this means for your spiritual development right now. If you're drawn to understanding these teachings about cremation and rebirth, it likely indicates that your soul is ready to embrace a more conscious approach to spiritual evolution. Your soul is preparing you to live this current incarnation with greater awareness of your eternal journey and deeper understanding of your true spiritual mission. Cayce taught that this kind of spiritual awakening doesn't happen by accident. It happens when a soul has reached a certain level of development across multiple lifetimes and is ready to take more conscious control of its evolutionary journey. The fact that you're watching this video and contemplating these profound truths about consciousness, death, and rebirth is evidence that your soul is calling you to wake up to your larger spiritual purpose. But here's the most important revelation that Cayce shared about conscious spiritual evolution. In his readings, Cayce explained that there comes a point in a soul's evolutionary journey when it no longer needs to reincarnate unconsciously. Instead, the soul begins to incarnate with full memory of its past lives and clear awareness of its spiritual mission. These awakened souls, Cayce said, are the ones who become spiritual teachers, healers, and way showers for humanity. They incarnate not to work out personal karma but to serve the collective spiritual awakening of human consciousness. The path to becoming such an awakened soul, Cayce revealed, involves making increasingly conscious choices in each incarnation. This includes being conscious about how you live, conscious about how you treat others, conscious about your spiritual practices, and yes, conscious about how you approach death and the preparation for your next life. Choosing cremation with spiritual understanding and intention is one way that advanced souls demonstrate their commitment to conscious evolution. They're not just following tradition or convenience. They're making a deliberate choice that supports their soul's journey toward higher consciousness and more purposeful incarnations. Here's where all of this connects to the choices you're making today in your current life. Cayce taught that every decision you make, every thought you think, and every action you take is creating the karmic patterns that will influence your next incarnation. If you live this life focused primarily on material gain and selfish desires, your soul will need to incarnate again into circumstances that teach you the limitations of materialism. But if you live this life focused on spiritual development, service to others, and conscious evolution, your soul will have earned the right to incarnate into circumstances that offer even greater opportunities for spiritual advancement. This is why understanding the connection between cremation and rebirth is so important. It's not just about what happens after you die. It's about recognizing that this current life is preparation for your next incarnation, and every choice you make now is setting the stage for your soul's future journey. Think about the life you're living right now. Are you developing the spiritual qualities that will serve your soul's evolution across lifetimes? Are you cultivating love, compassion, wisdom, and service? Or are you caught in patterns of fear, selfishness, and material attachment that will need to be worked through in future incarnations? Cayce revealed that souls who truly understand reincarnation don't wait until death to start preparing for their next life. They prepare through every moment of their current life by choosing spiritual growth over temporary pleasures, by choosing service over selfishness, by choosing consciousness over unconsciousness. Here's a profound practice that Cayce recommended for conscious spiritual evolution. Spend time each day in meditation contemplating your eternal nature as a soul. Remind yourself that you are not this temporary body or personality. You are an eternal consciousness that has lived many lives and will live many more. This body is just a vehicle your soul is using to learn specific lessons in this particular incarnation. When you meditate on this truth regularly, something remarkable happens. You start to see your current life challenges from a soul perspective rather than a personality perspective. That difficult relationship isn't just annoying, it's a karmic opportunity your soul chose before incarnating. That financial struggle isn't just bad luck. It's a lesson in developing spiritual qualities that transcend material security. That health challenge isn't just physical. It's a catalyst for deepening your understanding of the relationship between consciousness and matter. But here's what Cayce revealed about the relationship between daily spiritual practice and the rebirth process. Souls who maintain regular meditation and prayer practices during their earthly incarnations experience the death transition and rebirth preparation period very differently than souls who have neglected spiritual development. When a spiritually practiced soul leaves the body, it immediately recognizes the higher dimensions as its true home. It moves through the planetary sojourns with joy and eager anticipation, absorbing spiritual lessons and consciously planning its next incarnation with wisdom and purpose. But souls who have lived entirely in material consciousness without spiritual practice often experience confusion and resistance during the death transition. They don't recognize the higher dimensions. They're frightened by leaving the body. They resist moving forward into the rebirth preparation period because they're still clinging to their previous physical identity and material attachments. This is another reason why Cayce indicated that cremation can be spiritually beneficial, especially for souls who are ready to embrace conscious evolution. The dramatic and undeniable nature of cremation makes it impossible for the soul to remain in denial about having left the physical body. The fire force is a complete release that, while potentially uncomfortable for unprepared souls, ultimately serves the soul's forward movement into higher consciousness. Here's what you can do right now to prepare your soul for a conscious transition and rebirth. First, develop a daily meditation practice focused on remembering your eternal nature. Even just 10 minutes each morning, contemplating yourself as an eternal soul rather than a temporary body, can profoundly affect your consciousness development and prepare you for the eventual death transition. Second, live each day with awareness that you're creating karmic patterns that will influence your next incarnation. Ask yourself regularly whether your thoughts, words, and actions are serving your soul's highest evolution or creating problems you'll need to work through in future lives. Third, study spiritual teachings like those of Edgar Cayce that explain the soul's journey through multiple lifetimes. The more you understand about reincarnation and consciousness evolution, the more consciously you can navigate both your current life and your eventual transition and rebirth. Fourth, practice releasing attachment to material things and physical identity. Notice when you're identifying too strongly with your body, your possessions, your status, or your personality. Remind yourself that these are temporary tools your soul is using, but they're not who you really are. Fifth, cultivate the spiritual qualities that carry forward into future lives. Love, wisdom, compassion, courage, and service to others are soul qualities that you develop across many incarnations. Focus on strengthening these qualities rather than accumulating temporary material success. Here's the most powerful truth that Cayce revealed about conscious spiritual evolution. You don't have to wait until death to experience the higher dimensions of consciousness. Through deep meditation and spiritual practice, you can actually access the same planetary sojourns and spiritual dimensions that souls experience between incarnations. This is what Cayce called spiritual attunement, the ability to raise your consciousness while still in the physical body to perceive and learn from the higher realms. When you develop this ability, you're essentially doing between-life work while still alive. You're accessing spiritual lessons and consciousness expansion that would normally only be available after death. This accelerates your soul's evolution tremendously because you're not waiting for the death and rebirth cycle to make spiritual progress. You're actively working on your consciousness development right now in this current incarnation. Cayce taught that this is the path of the truly advanced soul, learning to live simultaneously in the physical dimension while maintaining awareness of the spiritual dimensions. These souls are consciously preparing for their next incarnation, even while completing their current one. They're choosing cremation not out of fear or tradition, but out of deep spiritual understanding that rapid release from physical attachment serves their conscious evolution. But here's the question that Cayce's teachings ultimately force you to answer. What is your soul's purpose in this current incarnation, and are you fulfilling it? Before you were born into this life, your soul looked at the lessons it needed to learn, the karma it needed to resolve, and the spiritual qualities it needed to develop. Your soul chose this specific lifetime, these specific circumstances, and these specific challenges, because they offered the perfect opportunities for the growth your soul was seeking. Are you honoring your soul's choice by living with spiritual awareness and purpose? Or have you gotten so lost in the drama and distractions of physical existence that you've forgotten why your soul chose to incarnate at this particular time, in this particular way? Cayce revealed that many souls reach the end of an incarnation with regret, realizing they spent their whole life focused on temporary material concerns while neglecting the spiritual mission they came to accomplish. These souls often choose to reincarnate quickly, eager to try again to fulfill the purposes they missed in their previous life. But souls who live consciously, who remember their eternal nature and spiritual mission throughout their incarnation, approach death very differently. They see it not as an ending, but as a graduation, a transition into the next phase of their eternal journey. For these souls, cremation becomes a celebration of completion, a joyful release from physical limitation into expanded spiritual consciousness. The remarkable gift that Edgar Cayce's teachings offer us is the understanding that we can choose which kind of soul we want to be. We can choose to live unconsciously, caught in material attachments and ego dramas, eventually facing death with fear and regret. Or we can choose to live consciously, remembering our eternal nature and spiritual purpose, eventually experiencing death as a joyful transition and consciously preparing for our next incarnation with wisdom and intention. This choice isn't just about death and rebirth. It's about how you live every single day of your current incarnation. It's about whether you're developing spiritually or stagnating, whether you're serving your soul's evolution or resisting it, whether you're preparing consciously for your next life or sleepwalking through your current one. Cayce's revelations about cremation and rebirth ultimately point us back to the most important spiritual work we can do right now, in this present moment. Wake up to your eternal nature. Remember your soul's purpose. Live with consciousness and intention. Develop the spiritual qualities that serve your evolution across lifetimes. Release attachment to temporary material concerns. Embrace your role as an eternal soul on a journey through multiple incarnations toward ultimate reunion with the divine. When you live this way, the question of cremation versus burial becomes almost secondary. What matters most is that you're living as a conscious soul, aware of your eternal journey, actively participating in your spiritual evolution, and preparing yourself through every choice and action for your next step forward in consciousness. If this exploration of Edgar Cayce's teachings on cremation and rebirth has opened your awareness to new spiritual possibilities, please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming videos on Cayce's profound insights into karma, soul missions, and spiritual evolution. Share this video with others who are ready to understand their eternal journey and live more consciously in their current incarnation. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on reincarnation and how understanding these teachings might change how you approach your current life. Your reflections help create a community of conscious souls supporting each other's spiritual evolution. Remember that Edgar Cayce's greatest gift to humanity wasn't just information about death and the afterlife. It was the revelation that we are eternal souls on a purposeful journey through multiple lifetimes, and that every moment of every incarnation offers opportunities for consciousness expansion and spiritual growth. Understanding cremation's role in the rebirth cycle isn't just about planning for death. It's about waking up to who you really are and living this precious incarnation with the awareness, purpose, and spiritual commitment that serves your soul's eternal evolution.